Hi everyone, it's Laura here for SugarPea Designs, and in today's video I'm going to share with you a very easy and very fun technique to create great backgrounds with distress inks on your cards. The stamp set that I'll be using today is called Cool Treats. It's by SugarPea Designs and it was released with the June 2019 release. It features this adorable penguin that I am now stamping on some Nina Solar White cardstock with alcohol marker proof ink by Spectrum Noir, and I'm going to color with Spectrum Noir markers. I started from the body of the penguin, which I'm coloring with some dark cool gray markers because I want it to look black. I started with IG9 in the shadow areas, I blended that out with IG7 and I left some white space for my highlights that I am filling in with my IG5 marker. And I'm shading everything as if the light was coming from the top right of the screen. I want the rest of his body and his face to look white, so I'm going to add some shading, again using some cool gray markers, but in lighter shades. So I started with my IG4 marker and then I blended that out with the IG1. And then I came in with a colorless blender to blend everything out towards the white areas. For his feet and the beak I used some oranges, again starting from my darkest marker, which is the OR3 marker, blending it out with my mid-tone, which is the OR2, and then for the highlights I chose the GB3 marker, which is a little bit of a more yellow orange. For the inside of his mouth I used CR10 and CR7, and then for his little floaty I used CR1, CR7 and CR10. I'm trying to leave a highlight to the top of the floaty that goes all around to give it a rounded shape. And because the CR7 and the CR1 are quite far from each other, I had to work at it a little bit in order to get a smooth blend. For his swimming suit, I decided to go for some teals and I used BT4, BT5 and BT8. And I had a color palette in mind already because I had already chosen the pattern paper that I was going to use and I knew how my background was going to look like. For the little strings on his swimsuit, I used CR1 and CR7, and then I die cut the image with the coordinating dies. For the background, I die cut some watercolor cardstock as well as some pattern paper cardstock from the Spots and Stripes Bright paper pad. And for that, I used the rectangle die in the Card Front Element Builders 2 set, also by SugarPea Designs. I set the pattern paper aside and I started working on my watercolor cardstock panel. I took the two additional images in the Cool Treats stamp set. One is a nice pop and the other one is an ice cream. I mounted them on an acrylic block and now I am stamping them randomly on the panel using some Versamark ink. It's hard for you to see and it was hard for me too, and this is why I am taking the panel closer to me and sort of moving it into the light so that I can see where I stamped. And once I was happy with the result, I could go ahead and coat everything with clear sparkle embossing powder by Wow. If there were any areas that needed a little bit more coverage, I went ahead and stamped more images there. And then I funneled the excess embossing powder back in the jar and melted everything with my heat gun. I'm using my reverse tweezers so that I don't accidentally burn my hands with the heat gun. And once the embossing powder was completely melted, I could start creating some fun splashy patterns on this background. For that, I used distress inks in 3 different colors, some stamp packaging and this Distress Marker Spritzer. This is also by Ranger. The colors of distress inks are Squeezed Lemonade, Carved Pumpkin and Twisted Citron. I basically just squished the ink pads on my work surface. I diluted the inks with some water from a distress sprayer and then I picked up the pigment with the stamp packaging. I put it down in selected areas on my background, and then I used my Distress Marker Spritzer to create these fun splashy patterns on the background itself. Before adding in a second layer, I made sure that the first one was completely dry because I didn't want the colors to mix too much. The water will reactivate your inks, so there will be some slight mixing, but you can reduce that if you dry your layers. And also make sure that your green and your orange don't touch too much because they will create a muddy color, which is not what we are going for on this bright and summery card. Also, I wanted to let you know that in case you don't have this tool, the marker spritzer, you can also use a straw. I have done it myself on previous cards where I used this technique, so it's a tried and tested solution. Back to the card, I added the second splash with my carved pumpkin distress ink, and you saw I went there a couple of times until I got a splatter that had the extension and the shapes that I wanted. And then for the twisted citron, I'm going to add that to opposite corners on my card front. And as I said, I was being careful not to overlap it with the carved pumpkin as much as I could. While the background was drying, I took the pattern paper that I had previously die cut and I trimmed down a strip that is roughly 2 inches tall. And then I decided that I wanted to add a little bit more interest to this strip, so I used one of the dies in the card front element builders set to create those slits on the right side of the strip. I could move on at this point to the sentiment. Again, the die that I used for the banner comes from the Card Front Element Builder 2 set by SugarPea Designs. This set is really great because it has all these different dies that help you build all the elements you need to create your card, so it's a great set to have. I hit embossed the sentiment on this black banner. The sentiment also comes from the Cool Treats stamp set. And then I could go ahead and start gluing everything to the background. I started from the patterned paper strip, which I adhered slightly offset towards the lower portion of the card front, and then I went ahead and glued down the penguin and the sentiment banner using my Nuvo Deluxe adhesive. At this point, I couldn't stop and had to add some finishing touches. So I first coated the floaty with some Spectrum Noir clear overlay pen that will add some subtle shimmer to that area. I added some white highlights with a white Jelly Roll pen. This is a Sakura Jelly Roll pen. And then I coated the floaty with my glossy accents. It would be better if you first adhered the card front to your card base before adding the glossy accents and the Nuvo drops that I'm adding now, because I had to wait for them to dry. I was afraid I was going to smudge them otherwise. But it didn't take very long at all, actually. I waited maybe a couple of hours, although it's safest to wait overnight. Because there were some peaks on my Nuvo drops, I decided to basically hit the card front over a cup that I put on my desk upside down. You can use any object really, and the effect is to flatten down the Nuvo drops. This makes them look like enamel dots more than drops and also gets rid of any peaks you might have. I waited for everything to dry and then I mounted my card front on a top folding A2 card base cut at 5.5 by 8.5 inches and scored at 4.25 inches. And then I used my Sakura white Jelly Roll pen to add some white stripes to the floaty. I didn't do this before adding the glossy accents because I was afraid they were going to basically smudge the white gel pen. But if you do it on top, it will be permanent, so if you let it dry, it will not smudge on you. And here is the final result. I really love the way this card turned out with that cute little penguin and the fun background that we created with Distress inks. It has a very nice somber vibe, and bonus points, it was quick to make. And that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video and I hope I inspired you to create with the SugarPea Designs Cool Treats stamp set. Don't forget to subscribe to the SugarPea Designs channel for more card making and paper crafting inspiration. As always, thank you all so much for stopping by and have a great day.